that. Okay, go for it. Pete?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our sort of Kentucky Equine Research's first webinar. I'm going to talk about broodmare nutrition. I think we've got people watching in New Zealand and a number of states of Australia, and even in England. So welcome to you, and thanks for your interest. I firstly just wanted to give a brief introduction to the company, which has been going since 1988 in central Kentucky, and then 1993 in Australia, and I've been involved with KR in all that time. And we do a unique combination of research, consultation and product development, or what the marketing people call targeted nutrition these days. We've got 2 research farms in the US, and I think we've just recently got a research farm south that's getting set up down at Longworry. So we've got our original farm in central Kentucky, and a performance center down in Florida, where we've got a training track and high-speed treadmills and so on set up to really study the impact of exercise and what we can do with nutrition to impact on exercise and performance. We think we do a combination of research that's into both basic and applied research. Here you can see one of our Australian designed research aids, which is the horse nappy. Was designed out of Melbourne, and that's a valuable research aid for doing digestibility studies. Also got a high-speed treadmill here and here, Australian designed jackets there, and here's our research barn in Versailles, Kentucky. One of the things we do we do that we think is really valuable is working with feed manufacturers, and we have brand alliance partners in, I think, over 20 countries. And in this part of the world, we work with Ridley Agri Products, Barrastock, Milne Feeds in Western Australia, who have Pegasus Feeds, and Farmlands in New Zealand, who have NRM and Macmillan Equine Feeds. Also work around the Asian Rim. I'll put South Africa in that, Dubai, India, Singapore, and Japan, Korea. We've left Beijing out of that particular map there. We've got a lot of free resources that you can use to help you feed your horse better. So we're nutrition advisors who can give either general advice or specific advice. We've got a microsteed equine nutrition calculator, fantastic website with heaps of research publications and easy to read articles on EquiNews, and a YouTube channel. Also got Clockit, and for those who are riding horses and want to know how far they ride, what sort of work they're doing, and keep a log of that, and even how hard the horse is working, then it's important. That could be a really useful aid to you, and that's a free app. So for downloading that on the App Store or Play Store. So welcome to Broodmare Nutrition. Apparently we have these things called polls. I don't know how they work, but I think you're going to be able to sense something shortly by Rebecca, who's the production manager of all of this, and asking how many broodmares you have. So if you can respond to that, that would be good, and give us a bit of a guide as to the sort of makeup of the audience there. So if I can get that out of the way. Well, how long's that last for?
30 seconds or so, Pete.
Righto, so I should stop talking or tell jokes. I'm no good at telling jokes. One of the colleagues I've worked with over the years, Steve Jackson, was a fantastic nutritionist and a great expert on breeding farms, and he was also a terrific joke teller. Now, the only thing was his jokes didn't change a lot. So, but he said they were good, and I'll keep using them. So, Steve told the same jokes for years, but the audience enjoyed it.
Beautiful. All right, I'll turn that one off. So, thank you to all you guys who contributed.
Righto. Okay, so I can get rid of that from my screen. So getting into the topic, good nutrition, and I'll put nutrition and feeding and talk about that interchangeably. I suppose we say nutrition's the science, feeding is the practicalities, and it really is this combination of art and science, and getting the two of them working together is vital for feeding any horse. We can have all the great ideas in the world, but if the horse doesn't eat it, or it's they eat too much of it, then we can have consequences from that. So it's a combination of good nutrition and feeding vital for fertility and productivity. I think the pregnant mare is a really important time, and it's often underestimated. And I think on some breeding farms, they put a lot of attention to the feeding of the young horses, but not as much attention to the feeding of the pregnant mare. And you can make a massive difference in the quality of the foal, in the health and the growth, and then the performance, and also the welfare throughout their life. And you get lifelong effects from impacts of the health of the pregnancy. And one of the influences on the health of the pregnancy is nutrition. Very important at the time of service to ensure optimum fertility. And the way you feed your mare, the lactating mare, will influence the growth of the foal on it and its development, because the foal's starting to share the feed after a couple of months of life. But also you've got influence of feeding on milk production, and the influence of milk production on growth is particularly important. So just have a little frozen screen. So that
just click on the slide, Pete, and then try again.
Okay, sorry about this, folks. Hello, we've got a bit far. Okay, so I've done that. Righto. So one of the key factors that we've got to consider in mare nutrition is body condition and weight, and that's one of the key drivers to fertility. But unfortunately, mare owner perceptions often demand fat mares, and if you're in if you've got a mare and you're in a showing discipline, then show judges demand fat horses, so you get to think that mares should look like that all the time. But most mares want to be maintained in what we call straight line nutrition. That's a Jackson terminology there, throughout the year. So you get the body condition that suits that mare, and it varies between the mares because they're all individuals, and you try and maintain them in that sort of condition throughout the year by adjustment of the feeding and maybe of exercise as the other parameter. In sheep, there's a benefit from flushing, which means getting them skinny and then putting weight on. And there's no benefit for that sort of practice in horses apart from maiden mares. So if you get mares that have been athletes and come in relatively light condition, and you want to get them into better condition to breed, then yes, flushing will benefit you. The same token, avoiding weight loss is important. So you don't want lactating mares losing weight, because then if it's a significant weight loss, they'll produce less milk and the foal will grow slower, but also they'll be reproductively less efficient. And you don't want massive weight loss during pregnancy. So underfeeding can have consequences related to fertility, growth rate, and potentially, if it's underfeeding of the right underfeeding protein, can increase the amount of developmental orthopedic disease. And in terms of the foal, the mare produces possibly a lower value horse. On the other hand, overfeeding can cause a number of issues, cost you more to do it, the number of metabolic problems, colic, laminitis, and an increased risk of developmental orthopedic disease. And there are some long-term impacts that you can create in the foal by, say, overfeeding the mare, pregnant mare. Grass is Dr. Green. I think this term was coined by Twink Allen, who was a famous New Zealand reproduction veterinarian at the Animal Health Trust in Newmarket, showing the benefits of green grass on the horse. And it's not only for breeding horses, but also for athletic horses as well. So grass is a great source of energy, protein, the right sort of omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins, antioxidants, and it's far superior to hay and haylage, and we don't understand all the benefits. Unfortunately, these days, with selective breeding of grasses for particularly cattle and to a lesser degree sheep, we're getting some really potent grasses with really high levels of sugar and high energy levels, and sometimes they can be too powerful for certain types of horses, certain breeds, particularly the good-doing breeds for ponies, sometimes for warm bloods, and quarter horses. So it's not to say unlimited grass is applicable to every horse, but for the breeding horse, access to green grass has a lot of benefits and reduces the amount of concentrate feed and supplementary forage that we need to give them. So one of the nutritional assessments that you can make for your horse is judging the energy supply. Now, you can't tell anything about how much copper the horse is getting unless you do the sums on nutrient intake, and you can't tell anything about the sodium intakes per se, these sort of other micronutrients, but you can about energy. And that's about looking at body condition, or if you can weigh your horse regularly, then you can look at it with weight. So if you're weighing mares with foals at foot, then you can tell whether the mare is losing weight and needs extra feed. But more likely you're going to be looking at body condition. So there are two systems for doing that. You need to look at the rump, the ribs, and the neck, and they can be used as a basis for adjustment of the grain and or the forage intake of the horses. So this is the Australian system, the 0 to 5 one. This is a sensational one that I designed many years ago. That's why it's sensational. But it's a relatively simple system. You have half points. So you might have a score 3.5, and score 3.5 is a nice body condition for a broodmare. So somewhere between good and fat. The American system, the Henneke Texas A&M one, is 1 to 9. Again, half points here, but I think it's a little bit more complex. But if you read research articles on the topic, you'll probably see more of this one referred to in terms of assessments, and I'll use some of these body condition scores later on. So thin mares, and I'm referring here to body condition score less than 2 on the Australian system, so less than moderate there. Thin mares, what are we seeing there? There are some negatives around thin mares. Longer gestation, longer intra-ovulatory periods, lower pregnancy rates, and potentially the influence on foal size. And certainly lower milk production is a factor. So, you don't want mares looking like these two on the right. I think one of them was in India and the other was a very old mare with poor teeth. So it's not to say that horses in India don't get fed well, but it is easier to get horses to lose condition over there. So avoiding this, you don't want your mares looking like that, but equally you don't want them looking too much like that or too much fatter than that. The fat late pregnant mare happens commonly, and it seems that there are some changes in genetics around these days, and in the thoroughbred world, or the Danehill blood has meant we've had better doing horses that are more likely to get fat on less feed than they used to. So you don't get a big effect on the size of the foal. You're certainly going to get more difficult foalings. You'll get more angular limb deformities and flexural deformities, upright foals. You've got a risk of laminitis. The pregnant mare has an element of insulin dysregulation anyway, or as used to be called insulin resistance. And when they're obese, they've got a much greater risk of that turning into laminitis. This one study in quarter horses showed very fat mares have reduced milk production, so the foal grew slower, and also a less potent colostrum. So certainly no beneficial effect on fertility. So does obesity impair reproduction? I think that slide would suggest that it does. Study here done where pregnant mares were fed to be in good body condition score, that's between 5 and 6 on the Henneke scale, or fat, 7 to 8. And there was no differences there, apart from the fact it cost them twice as much to feed the mare. And there were some inherent risks of laminitis when you get to that stage. So, yeah, you don't have to have them looking round and very heavy. You don't want to have fat mares. And that's a combination of feed and exercise. And it's one of the, sometimes you get it with these great pastures that they have and in small paddocks where horses don't get to exercise. And I think actually there's benefits in putting mares on the walker in some situations, certainly putting dry mares. If you don't have the area for them to exercise and you don't have the hill that will make them do some work, then and you have a walker, then putting mares on the walker can be really useful. And that's both pregnant mares and dry mares. Other studies have shown a number of negative effects, including early embryonic loss, reduced endometrial health, and so on. So no great reason to keep your mares fat. Interestingly, some New Zealand, I suppose you would say, preliminary work suggesting that mares that were gaining weight at the time of being covered, this has come out of M.A.C.V.Sc, were more likely to have colts. And I think that work needs a bit more investigation before we get too excited about that. So, foal birth weight. That could be one of the reasons that many people give for trying to keep their pregnant mares on the heavy side. You know, want a bigger foal. Foal birth weight is not really related to feeding of the mare or to gestation length. What it is related to is parity. So maidens have smaller foals, as you can see from the numbers on the right-hand side. So this is maiden mares here, 51 kilo foals. This is a leading farm in central Kentucky. And then as the number of foals go up, then we get sort of similar sort of numbers, but this peak in the sort of 3 to 4 period. Age of the mare, older mares, 5 and above, 5 or 6 and above are having heavier foals. But there is an effect at the other end of the spectrum where with aged mares, then I think the foal weight comes down. Placental weight has an effect up to a point, and then often some of the heavier placentas are related to inflammation, and that can work in the opposite direction. But one of the key things is the size of the mare and the size of the stallion. You know, big mares and big stallions will have bigger foals. Now, is there any reason to worry about a very high birth weight, or very low birth weight? Yeah, there is. High birth weights, more dystocia. And if you then damage the mare internally, you may take longer before you can breed her again, or reduce subsequent fertility. A UK study showed this off quite well, that mares that were having foals that were greater than 62 kilos, then they had a lower foaling rate the following year. Now, that didn't, the detail wasn't there about the number of services or detail like that. But essentially what you want is you want to get your mare in foal each year. So in that particular study, they found that the mares that had the very big foals had less foals the following years. More conformation abnormalities said, and more developmental orthopedic disease in the foal. On the other hand, the very low birth weight, and you need to look at low birth weights with maidens on a different scale compared to older mares. Longer to stand a nurse. Often they've been sick, so the mare may have had placentitis or other issues, and or foals are dismature, and they're also smaller yearlings and lower value. We've just done some research, I guess it's a pilot study looking at the relationship between growth, survey x-rays, sales results and racing results on 6 farms in Kentucky, and we're following that up on more farms in many countries of the world. And you look here, you can see 2 things. Small foals on the right-hand side, small foals in the first quartile of foal birth weight, so these were the smallest ones, had less OCD than the bigger foals. So the 3rd and 4th quartile foals had a lot more OCD. But at the same time, the first quartile foals were less likely to be stakes winners than some of the other size foals. So perhaps less success on the track, matching up with less skeletal disease. Now, what about weight gain during pregnancy? People worry about that a bit and go, what's normal and what do I have to, what am I shooting for? And this was a UK study looking at feeding maiden mares, 2 different types of grain intakes. So they started out with initial body condition score of 4.6 on the Henneke scale, and then the high grain intake group, they took a bit of feed to do this, got them up to 7.8. So they were fat mares, and they gained more weight. They gained 140 kilos in the period of study, which I think was 120 days. But it didn't make any difference to birth weights, placental weights, or average daily gain of the foal. It did increase the placental area and the amount of fetal fluids, but it didn't have any impact on things that really mattered. So we don't know what the ideal body condition score for maiden foaling mares, and there is a school of thought that maybe they should be a little heavier than you might have a multiparous mare in terms of looking for perhaps a better foal. But that's, I guess, speculation rather than being backed by really solid research. What about the opposite? What about weight loss during pregnancy? And the sort of fetus is really well protected by the metabolism, so that it's protected from things that happen to the mare. And that's just a natural evolutionary mechanism to look after the next generation. So significant weight loss can have an impact, but it has to be significant. It doesn't matter if the mare loses a few kilos. So there was a UK study of maiden mares, and it was disrupted because they got strangles. Half of them got strangles in mid-pregnancy, and some of the weight losses were really dramatic. And in those mares, there was a reduction in the placental area and efficiency, and decrease in the foal length at birth. But again, also at weaning. And so I think that just shows you this long-term impact of things that can happen during late pregnancy. In man, it's found that mid-gestation weight losses reduce length, and late gestation losses reduce birth weight. So I guess if you looking to breed a basketballer, then hopefully the mother doesn't lose any weight in mid-gestation. So getting around the research about what's the appropriate condition and weight gain, etc., comes to how we should be feeding mares. So we have 3 stages of mare feeding that we need to consider, and we need to treat them differently in different stages. So I've got a dry mare and early pregnancy that tends to be the same, but maiden mares need to be treated differently to everyday other dry mares. We've got late pregnancy, and I talk more about the second half. We used to talk about first, second, and third trimesters, but these days I think it's more appropriate to talk about early and late pregnancy. And we've got lactation, but hopefully we're trying to get lactation being combined with early pregnancy. That's the aim if you're breeding every year. And so does early pregnancy throw up any challenges? And it certainly does to the way you manage the weight of the lactating mare. So dry mares, talk about dry mares. Mares that are in poor body condition have got a longer winter anestrus, longer follicular phase. And it's sort of said the old sort of judgment is that when the mare loses their winter coat, then they'll be ready to breed. So they're cycling properly and ovulating and ready to breed. Body condition score less than 2.5, delayed first ovulation and lower first pregnancy rate. So these are thin mares. And these are the mares that do need flushing, and there's a real Dr. Green effect. I think one of the you need to be a bit careful if you've got mares, there's the habits, or one of the things people do with dry mares is put them under lights to help advance sort of normal spring ovarian function and fertility. Although the advent of the lights like EquiLume have changed that. But one of the things, if you are putting mares in yards or stables under lights, they need to have enough to eat overnight. That's one of the errors people make, I think, is in not providing enough hay for these horses to eat, because a mare can eat half a bale of hay a day, and if you put her up for night in June and July or August, where she's in there for 16 hours or so, and only give them 1 biscuit of hay and a bit of hard feed, then you can see there's going to be a lot of time when the mare isn't eating, and that can be detrimental to weight gain, because you want to maintain weight, and in some circumstances you need to have weight gain. So maiden mares, we're going to feed extra. So what are we doing about the maiden mare? If it's a racehorse, they're often retired quite late in relatively poor body condition. They're certainly not ideal for breeding. And they have a sort of poor digestive and metabolic efficiency at that stage, and they're not used to pasture being the main part of their diet, or they're not used to groups, certainly not since they were a foal, weanling or a yearling, and take a while to work out the pecking order effect in the groups. You know, mares, as you all know, mares can be difficult in terms of getting that pecking order sorted out and establishing who's the dominant mare and maintaining that dominance. So if they're thin, you want weight gain, and that's where small groups are preferred, and often treating them as individuals in terms of how much you feed them, and feeding them far more than your other dry mares on the farm. So it's probably the maiden mares and the really old mares, those mares that are starting to lose condition related to being older, that are going to benefit from some extra feeding. In early pregnancy, the requirements aren't that very far above maintenance, unless the mare's lactating. So the early pregnant mare that doesn't have a foal on them can mostly deal with many of her nutrient requirements from just forage. But a balanced ration is still important, and that's where a balancer pellet, or if the forage is of low quality, e.g. you're in Queensland at the moment, you've got a drought, nothing on the ground, you don't have great hay or not great amounts of hay, then you're going to use lower intakes of a concentrated feed. But avoid overfeeding and getting your mare too fat. The mare is not eating for the foal until about sort of 6 to 7 months of pregnancy. So that's making no difference to her nutrient requirements. Her requirements are very similar to that of a dry mare. We get to the second half of pregnancy, and you can see here on the right-hand side this graph showing growth of the foal. And it's not till about 7 months that you know, your 50-odd kilo foal is going to be more than about 10 kilos. So the nutrients that are needed to feed that foal and to get it growing normally, they don't go up that much in the first half of pregnancy. Then they start to go up in the second half of pregnancy. Pregnant mares in late pregnancy, in say the 11th month of pregnancy, need about 40% more protein and lysine, say, than they do, lysine being the key amino acid, than they do in early pregnancy. So protein and mineral needs like calcium and so on go up a bit, but there's a great increase in the needs for trace minerals. Copper, zinc, manganese and selenium, we think, are really important. And the reason is that the milk is a very poor source of these trace minerals for the foal, and so it's important to get these, to feed these in larger amounts to the pregnant mare, to store them in the fetal liver. And some great research in New Zealand has shown that you know, copper supplementation in late pregnancy reduced the amount of physitis in 5-month-old foals. So it's again showing a long-term impact. Vitamin A is important. Vitamin A is present in a lot of feeds and supplements in varying amounts, but also in green grass. So if you've got green grass you're feeding your pregnant mare, then that'll go a long way to meeting her vitamin A needs. But if you don't, then you can have some long-term impact on health and growth of the foal. It can be really long-term impact. So Kathleen Crandall, one of our colleagues in the US, a nutritionist, did her PhD on vitamin A, and that really eloquently showed the importance of vitamin A. So that's most important if you don't have green grass to feed, vitamin A and E. But avoid this either extreme. Don't let them get too fat, and try and avoid weight loss. And the weight loss mainly comes from disease more than just a lack of feed. Now, the needs for extra energy in the diet vary, and that depends on the breed of the horse, the individual metabolism, and the amount of forage that's on the ground. So if you've got ponies or warm bloods, or even Arabs, you know, they don't need a lot of extra energy in late pregnancy. And if you feed them like you would feed a thoroughbred or a standardbred, they'll get too fat. But on the other hand, if you have thoroughbred mares and they're older mares, they often need quite a bit of feed to maintain themselves in the right sort of body condition. Depends on the season, on the grass quality, on the impact of winter. It's obviously harder in winter, where they've got the pasture is lower energy, there's less daylight hours, there's more water in the pasture, etc. So there's no one size fits all to how much you need to feed a pregnant mare. At a minimum, they need supplementation with a well-formulated balancer pellet. So here you've got a concentrated mineral source and mineral and vitamin source, but particularly mineral. And intakes can range from 120 grams to about 1 kilo a day, that sort of thing. And that complements a diet of plentiful pasture and hay. So this balancer pellet's going to be a low calorie intake and a low intake deal. Now, protein and amino acid intakes can vary quite a bit depending upon, and the needs will vary depending upon what it's fed with. But if you've got high protein pasture, then you don't need to have a massive intake of protein in late pregnancy. And then you can be feeding a balancer, and if mares need extra energy, they could be topped up with something like oats. Or you can switch to a suitable mare feed. But a lot of feeds for mares, you've got to feed 3 kilos of them to meet the sort of mineral needs for late pregnancy, sometimes 2 kilos. So if you can't feed the 3 kilos, you're much better to do it with a balancer or a mixture of the two, and that can often be done. So you give a balancer of topping up a suitable mare feed because you're feeding the mare feed below the recommended rate. Now, a couple of nutrients that have got sort of specific roles in late pregnancy I want to mention, and selenium is a really important antioxidant, role in growth, reproduction, the immune response. You get varying levels in both natural feeds and premix feeds. So there are many areas, Western Australia, areas of New Zealand, a lot of areas of New Zealand, of course. Hunter Valley's low in selenium, Gippsland and coastal areas of Victoria low in selenium. And so if you've got forages that, if your mare's grazing in that area, or you've got forages that come from that area, then now you'll need to pay special attention to the selenium level of the feed or supplement. And we put more selenium in feeds that we design in Western Australia and New Zealand for that sort of reason. So selenium, here's some of the research that we've done showing the benefits of selenium supplementation for foal immunity. Mares were supplemented in late pregnancy with either 1 milligram of selenium or 3 milligrams per day. That increased the level of selenium in both the colostrum and the milk. And even though they couldn't measure a change in colostral IgG, there was an increased level of IgG, significant level of IgG in the foal serum. So you had improved passive transfer. And that can help reduce disease in newborn foals. Vitamin E doing the same thing, research done showing either 800 IUs of vitamin E versus 1600, increasing levels in the serum IgG in the mare and in the colostrum and in the foal. So multiple benefits there with vitamin E. Vitamin E, like vitamin A, high levels in green grass. So the mare's need for vitamin E in either feed or supplements very much going to depend on whether the green feed. Once that green feed is made into hay, then levels can be quite high early on, but they decline very rapidly. So if you were feeding hay that was made last spring or summer, then its vitamin E levels would be much, much lower. If you're feeding that now, its vitamin E levels would be much, much lower than they would at the if the mare had been grazing the grass or grazing the lucerne at the time it's made into hay. Now, another nutrient that's of interest in a lot of horses is omega-3 fatty acids. I really refer here to the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, that you get from fish oil. And there's been research in a number of animals showing the benefits of these omega-3 fatty acids on reproduction in terms of ovulation rate, blocking release of prostaglandins, reduced early embryonic loss, presumably pertaining to the impact on prostaglandins, blood flow to the placenta, which would improve the nutrient supply to the fetus. Even human research showing improvements in coordination at age 7. So perhaps maybe you can get a better athlete out of, if you've got better coordination, out of supplementation with omega-3 fatty acids. and improving immune competence of the fetus. So there's a lot of benefits from omega-3 fatty acid. Here's the complicated slide for the test at the end, showing the relationships between these different fatty acids. So the green pathway is what we're looking for. And so we get common short chain, 18 carbon fatty acids, the linoleic acid, the omega-3 form, and the omega-6 form, linoleic. And they compete with this enzyme to be desaturase and elongase enzyme to process them to the more active forms. So in the green side, the EPA and DHA side, we're looking for prostaglandins and local hormones that are protective, have an anti-inflammatory function, whereas the red side, we're looking towards pro-inflammatory mediators. Now, we get our omega-3 and 6 fatty acids from oils, or we can get them from pasture. Interestingly, green pasture's got quite a nice ratio. It's not the same in hay, and certainly not the same in concentrates. So we can have oils that are high in omega-6 fatty acids, such as corn oil, sunflower oil, rice bran oil. And these may have some benefits in terms of reduced acid secretion in the stomach and some benefits for horses that are at risk of gastric ulcers. But if you're wanting the anti-inflammatory effects, you've really got to go for the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, that you get from fish oil. And you won't get the same impact feeding linseed oil or canola oil. If you want an energy supplement, then sure, you're going to feed those things. But if you're wanting the benefits of the omega-3 fatty acids, then you need to look at fish oil. So some of the research, again, a bit more of the research that's been done here. And yeah, I didn't see the typo in that slide there. So prize for spotting the typo. But we've got improvements in the levels of these fatty acids in not only in blood, but also in the endometrium, altered gene expression, better biopsy scores, reduced post-breeding inflammatory responses, and improving progesterone levels after ovulation, and even benefits after foaling, faster involution of the gravid horn, and improvements in blood flow. So a number of benefits that you can see from supplementing fish oil to mares before foaling and up until the time that you may want to, up until the time that you get the mare solidly in foal. If you've got mares that are prone to placentitis or early embryonic loss or fetal loss, then there's more reason for doing that. So I guess it may be a special needs situation rather than every mare. Interestingly, EquiNews, and I'll mention EquiNews later, is a great source of information on nutrition and health. And an article came out just last week. This is our education website, New Hope for Aging Broodmares, omega-3 fatty acids. And so it was supplementation with fish oil and some antioxidants that led to improvements in metabolic function in oocytes and so on. So some potential benefits for fertility. Now, what happens in the last month before foaling? Mares often cut down feed intake. When you look at the size of the foal, it's not surprising that they want to eat less. And the digestibility of the feed is reduced, and that's because it has an increased transit time. They don't gain a lot of weight this time, so it's not a time when you've got to pour the feed into them, but the quality is often important. If you're going to feed them differently after foaling to what you fed before foaling, it's a good time to acclimatise them to that feed, adjust to the diet that's fed after foaling, and a good time to increase the protein intake, because in lactation, they get a dramatic increase in protein intake. So our key factors in late pregnancy to remember: adjusting the concentrate to the forage supply to maintain the right sort of body condition. Could be a balancer, or it could be a suitable concentrate. Extra trace minerals, really important. If you don't have green grass, or you're not in an area with decent levels of selenium in the forage, you may want to look at supplementing those, or at least looking at the levels in the feed that you're using. Same goes for vitamin A. Omega-3 fatty acids are probably again, shows the benefit of green grass, or supplementation for special needs mares. Now, when we get the foal on the ground, you get dramatic increases in the mare's energy requirements and protein requirements, calcium and phosphorus, all related to the amount of milk she makes. And there's major consequences of weight loss in this circumstance. Yeah, the mare can lose a little bit of weight, but if she loses too much weight, she's going to be reproductively less efficient, she's going to make less milk, and the growth rate of the foal will slow down. Now, sometimes you want that because the foal's growing too fast, but that's where it gets difficult to match up the needs of the foal on the ground and the needs of the mare. So here's some of the numbers about the nutrient needs of the mare, and just look at the potential increases there. So that's early pregnancy to late pregnancy versus early pregnancy to early lactation. So, dramatic increases in energy, protein, and calcium intakes, and dramatic increases in lysine as a key amino acid. Here, you've got to consider when the mare's foaling. So mares foaling early or late in the season may need extra energy, or it may relate to just, the seasonal conditions where you are. So if there's less energy available from the pasture, then they'll need more hay and maybe increased amount of concentrate feed. If they're in the yards because the foal's locked up in a yard, because if it's been sick or it's been bridged or something like that, then you need to give that mare ad lib forage. And it's the time when lucerne hay it really comes into its own. So feeding some lucerne hay, a combination of lucerne and grass hay, or all lucerne hay to mares in these circumstances avoids them getting into a protein deficit situation. So when you're feeding lactating mares, pasture's good. You may only need a balancer. That's what happens in New Zealand and certainly some areas of Australia. In late winter or when things dry off in summer, you may need some concentrates. And you need to remember individuality. So old mares or big milkers that lose weight may need to be fed differently. If you're not feeding the mare, considering about feeding her just before weaning, because that gets the foal acclimatized to what they're going to eat after weaning. Now, in a way, you want the mare to have a reduced energy intake at the time of weaning, energy and protein, that helps her dry off. But you've got more impact, more beneficial impact by feeding something to improve the foal adapting to the feed after weaning. Now, you get weight loss during lactation. That's going to affect reproductive efficiency, and as I said, will affect the growth of the foal. So, mares tend to draw on their reserves to maintain milk production. But if you're weighing mares, you'll pick this up, and you'll do that better than if you are, in fact, just looking at them in terms of body condition. I think the confined mare is the key one where this happens, or sometimes the older mare, large hay supply for those mares. The summary of the lactating mare. Massive increase in many nutrients. Luckily, there's a big increase in appetite. So they can really plough through some forage if it's available. And the key requirement is milk production. But at the same time, you want the mare back in foal on the first service. Big breed and individual differences here. So certain breeds like Arabs that don't need a lot of extra energy during pregnancy do make a fair bit of milk. And they then will need feeding during lactation. It may be a time of year where pony mares do need some feed, whereas often you're worrying about them getting too fat and foundering. So you want to avoid major weight loss, and it's very much an individual situation. I just quickly mentioned phytoestrogens, something that can come from feed and can influence fertility. So they're estrogen-like compounds in legumes that have been shown to impact fertility in sheep and cattle. There's been speculation about their impact on horses, but it hasn't been proven. Some of the areas they might come from, lucerne and white clover, that are attacked by pathogens or have disease, subclover cultivars. Soy meal is often thought of as a source of phytoestrogens, but certainly in the amounts we feed to horses, I think that's pretty safe. And I guess it may be something you consider if you've got mares failing to ovulate or not cycling normally. So my summary about the important things on mare nutrition and fertility, or mare feeding and nutrition and fertility, is straight line nutrition. And the mares that need to gain weight are maiden mares that come in light condition and are not in the sort of condition you want for optimum fertility. They're the only ones that need to gain weight. You need to be careful about a mare that doesn't eat and loses a big amount of weight in pregnancy, and avoid weight loss after foaling, unless you're in the situation where you're not breeding the mare again and weight loss is okay in that circumstance, as long as it doesn't impact on milk production and the growth of the foal. Growth, of course, is the subject of our next webinar with Dr. Clarissa Brown-Douglas in a couple of weeks, so I don't want to steal too much of Clarissa's thunder. Value of grazing. You know, I can't emphasise this enough, the importance of grazing. And there's twofold there. One is the grass as the key, you know, the number one feed in the diet of every broodmare should be. And the second, except a mare that had laminitis or, you know, was prone to colic on grass or something like that. And the second is that the exercise that they get while grazing is really important. Exercise is really important during pregnancy, and very important for dry mares that are pulling urine, things like that. Yeah, exercise is really important. Trace minerals, vital late pregnancy, pay particular attention to them. Antioxidants pre-foaling, and omega-3 fatty acids, consider them for difficult mares with special needs. So I've come to the end of the presentation today. I think there's some questions coming up somewhere in some that have been sent in on Q&A. And I think Rebecca, David and Clarissa are going to participate in those. But I did want to mention EquiNews again. And I had a slide there which disappeared. Great resource, EquiNews. We have a fortnightly e-newsletter that comes out with about 4 topics, but we've got tens of thousands of articles on nutrition and health, and I really urge you to get there. And they're not, there's some great education. They're really well written. They've got some writers who can take the science out of the show. So thank you very much for your attention and your interest. And I think we will now try and do the questions, and as this is the first one, I'm not quite sure how that's all going to work.
All right, so we've got a few questions that have come through, so I'll just start to skip through some of them. The first one was from Sophie, and she asked how important it is to test pasture and forage, and how many times a year or what time of the year should I get it tested?
Okay, I think if you're trying to do absolutely the best you can, then pasture testing is a useful aid if it's going to be a major part of the diet of the horse. We can tell things about, we usually have got an indicator about the protein content. We can tell things about the sugar content of the pasture, and that might have an impact on the glycemic index of the diet of horses on it, but also about the mineral levels, and most particularly the mineral levels. Do we have calcium and phosphorus inversions for extended periods of time that can make an impact on the amount of calcium and phosphorus we need to add in the diet? What are our trace mineral levels like? If you're going to do it, there are some farms that do it 4 times a year. But do they really adjust the diet that often? I'm not sure that they do. So I think getting a handle on it at times of the year when you've got pasture being a significant part of the horse's diet is a good thing. And with new farms, we'll often do it. And it's surprising the variation that you can get and some of the things that you can pick up that are important, like these calcium phosphorus inversions that can extend for prolonged periods. So I think useful. Is it essential? No, it's not essential.
Okay. And we also had another question from Angela, just asking or saying that she has a mixture of warm blood and thoroughbred mares on the property. Is there a best way to feed them the same?
Yeah, that's a good question, because their needs are different, and their metabolisms are different. The warm bloods are going to be bigger mares, but their metabolism, they just don't need as much energy. So the way to feed them warm bloods for much of the year is with a balancer pellet. And so in some situations, the thoroughbred mares will do fine just on that. But if it's very dry or there's not much pasture, then, you know, maybe you've got to separate the thoroughbred mares for feeding. Or putting nose bags on them, you know, maybe a different way. I mean, that's something I've seen mares fed with nose bags where you can individualise the feeding, and that may be a way that you could do it, or you keep them in different paddocks.
I've got another one here from Erin asking, this one was on Facebook, asking, is there any nutritional support you can provide to mares with a history of placentitis?
Yeah, I think as well as the veterinary treatment that you're offered, I think there's benefits in the omega-3 fatty acids, the fish oil from EO3. So that needs to be given every day. It's a bit of a hassle, obviously, if you've got mares in a group, because you've probably got to syringe it into the mare's mouth. But the anti-inflammatory benefits from fish oil, I think, are worth doing, and there's some certainly commonly used in Kentucky as a supplement for mares in that circumstance.
And the last question I had come through was, and I think Clarissa's got some, can mares that have had a caesarean ever carry a foal again?
Yes.
So that's all I had, Rissy.
Excellent. Thanks, Pete. That was fabulous. A couple of questions that have come up in the Zoom chat. We've got one here from Emma Nicol that says, if you have a mare on the recommended rates of a balancer pellet or a concentrate, do you need to supplement selenium or vitamin E?
Thanks for the question, Emma. You should probably have been answering the caesarean question. But that depends on the formulations of the feed or supplements. So you need to do the calculations, and it very much depends on where you are in terms of the selenium content of the pasture. So there are certain feeds and supplements that have had low levels of selenium, and there are obviously certain areas that are low in selenium, so you're going to pay more attention if you're in one of those areas. Vitamin E depends very much. We're seeing more vitamin E in regular feeds these days than there was when I started doing this caper, and that means you've probably got less need for supplements. If you've got green pasture, and that's a significant part of the mare's intake, then I don't think you will. But if you've got mares on dirt and you're giving them hay, then you may well need to supplement with vitamin E in that circumstance.
Excellent. And another one here that says, what would be your recommended dose rate of fish oil? That's from Noel.
Okay, the fish oil, it's probably, I'll say 30 to 60 mils. 30 mils may be more practical, a sort of syringe full. And it will work faster the more you can give in the early stages. But yeah, that'd be my recommended. It's a bit wide, really.
Right, that's fine. And then another question here from Emma Flynn says, I bought a mare that has a body condition score of 5 last month. She is due mid-December. I was aiming for slow weight loss. Is this okay? What is the best option for her?
Well, I think that's a good option to try and get some weight off. Best option might be a grazing muzzle for periods of the day, depending on where you are and what pasture's there. Some exercise will also be beneficial, and often it's very hard to get weight loss in certain horses unless you exercise them. So yeah, maybe you've got to jump on her and ride her around, or put her in the shaft, put her on the jogger or something like that. So but yeah, slow weight loss will be fine. You just want to avoid acute weight loss.
Excellent. She's actually said, ha, thank you.
Right.
Because of you riding this heavily pregnant mare down the road.
Tie her to the clothesline and the rotary clothesline.
Excellent. And then one more here that says, is there studies relating to overfeeding pregnant mares and fetal loss? Sorry, are there studies? So overfeeding pregnant mares and fetal loss.
Yeah, I think there is the Kubiak study that I referred to early. I'd have to go back and look in detail at that. But there's certainly no benefit. But if you, I'd have to look in detail at that particular study, the overfeeding quarter horse mare study.
Right, we might be able to get back to.
Yeah, we could. That could be a question we sort of take on notice.
Excellent. All right, we'll get back to you on that one.
Would you get back to her? Is that right? No.
That's fine.
Okay, so are that all your questions, Rissy?
They're all the ones I've got. If anyone wants to type some last minute questions, we'll be looking at waiting in anticipation.
Go for it. So I've just got one more little poll question for you guys, just to see what topics you would like in future. So we've got a couple more which Clarissa will talk to you about in a moment. But there's a few other topics that, you know, if there's another topic that you might like to learn about, maybe just give us a little bit of an indication on this particular poll here, and we can get some more content ready for you on a different day. So we'll just give you about 30 seconds to do that. But if you've got any questions, other questions, just let us know.
There's a question popped up on the screen during it, but
that one's been done.
We've done that?
We answered a couple. One said, oh yeah, we've answered a couple through the talk.
Righto.
There's the late gestation one.
Oh, that's right, the late gestation, which I did answer separately, but you could answer it if you like. Honey badger, I was going to say, sorry.
Thank you, Selma.
It says, let me just...
Oh, if you've answered it, that's all right.
I've answered it. It just said, what do you classify as late gestation? And I said 7 months onwards.
Yeah.
You might say 8, but I say 7.
Or 6.
I say get the trace minerals into them regardless.
Yeah. I mean, it's not an all or nothing scenario. It's not an all and nothing scenario. You know, it's but their needs in mid-pregnancy are a little lower than they are at the end of pregnancy. But I tend to these days sort of cut it in half.
Excellent.
All right. Well, Clarissa, did you want to do a little intro to what you're going to cover off next time?
Certainly. So I think I'm scheduled for the next continuation of this KER 2020 webinar series on nutrition for the growing horse. So once you've got your broodmare sorted and you've got your foal on the ground, I'll be talking about feeding them from foaling right through to 2 years and beyond. I'll talk about managing nutrition for sound growth to prevent developmental concerns, how and when to introduce hard feed to your foals, getting the balance right for optimal bone development. And then at the end, I'll delve into some of our very latest research on looking at growth rates and performance. So hopefully we'll see you all there on August the 13th. I think that's the date, but there will be lots of invitations, etc., coming out and advertising this. We'll look forward to having a good night with that too. But thank you all very much for attending this evening's, and hopefully you got something out of it.
Absolutely. So I've just put the link for the next to register for Clarissa's in the chat. So anybody that would like to do that, please go through and do that now. And yeah, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
That's the one time.
Well done.